Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Mendel's three laws of inheritance. So the first section that we're going to talk about are the laws that as they were described in that video that you watched. Okay, so first, each trait is determined by a specific element. Each characteristic is each characteristic is inherited separately. And third, each characteristic is determined by the intersection, one from each parent. Okay, so on their own, that doesn't mean a whole lot. So let's look at them using a little bit more scientific language. And we'll go ahead and define these in just a moment. But the first, in diploid organisms, chromosome pairs and their alleles are separated into individual gametes, eggs and sperm cells, to transmit genetic information to the offspring. Okay? The dominant allele is completely masks the effects of the recessive allele. A dominant allele produces the same phenotype in heterozygotes and homozygotes. And alleles in different chromosomes, are distributed randomly to individual gametes. Alright, again, looking at those in isolation, it's just kind of a lot of words. So let's talk about some of those words. Alright, so first we have diploid, and that is any organism that has two sets of chromosomes. Okay, like we talked about in the sexual reproduction with mitosis and meiosis, when those chromosomes get copied and then divided. Alright, so when there are two sets, we have a diploid cell, and when there's one set, we have what's called a haploid cell. Okay, so diploid, two sets, haploid, one set. Alright, okay, so an allele is a possible expression of chromosomes or genes. And this can be talking either physically or genetically, how it's actually written out in the genetic code. So gametes are sex cells, egg or sperm, and they contain half the genetic information, again they're haploids, of an organism. Dominant is a stronger characteristic that masks a weaker one, even if there's only one present. So this is what's going to be visible most often. We'll talk about that in a bit. Okay. So recessive is a weaker characteristic that only shows if both chromosomes are the same. Phenotype, how chromosomes are expressed visually in an organism. So depending on what the genes are, like with a dominant gene, dominant characteristic, even if there's only one present, you're still going to see that dominant characteristic. But if there are two present, you're still going to see that dominant characteristic. So you're not necessarily going to know what the case is if there's one or two in the case of a dominant gene. So, for example, a phenotype would be eye color. You know, lots of people have brown eyes, but you don't necessarily know if they have both sets of genes are coded for brown eyes, or if only one set of gene is coded for brown eyes and one is for blue eyes, because brown is the dominant gene, it's the dominant characteristic, and so even if they only have one brown chromosome, they're still going to end up with brown eyes. But then the genotype is how the chromosomes are expressed. So say for brown eyes, they could have one that's for brown, one that's for blue, and that would then be their genotype when we're talking about what their individual codes are, but the phenotype, they're still going to end up with brown eyes. Now, we have heterozygous and homozygous. So heterozygous is when there are different chromosomes, so again, the one brown and the one blue. Homozygous, if someone had blue eyes, they would have to have two genes for blue eyes. Okay, so now that we kind of have an idea of what these words mean, let's go back and talk about all of these laws that we have. Okay, so we're going to start in the middle and then go back and talk about how that relates to the laws that were presented in the video. Because as you read in the article, these exact words were not in Mendel's paper. So that's a summary of what he wrote anyway. So this is, you know, another summary. So we're just comparing two different summaries. Okay, in diploid organisms, organisms that have two sets of chromosomes for every trait, chromosome pairs and their alleles, the different ways that those chromosomes can be expressed, are separated into individual gametes, eggs and sperm cells, and transmitted to transmit genetic information to the offering. Okay, so this one actually kind of goes with number 3. What that's saying is that basically parent information is split in half and then is recombined to then produce progeny or offspring information. The characteristic is determined by the intersection. Each characteristic is determined by the intersection of the parent information. Diploid organisms, chromosome pairs are separated and then combined together for the offspring. All right, so basically, you know, half of your mom, half of your dad, they combine together and that makes you. We have the dominant allele completely masks the effects of the recessive allele. A dominant allele produces the same phenotype in heterozygous and homozygous. So again, that conversation we were having earlier about eye color, the dominant allele, if you say you're looking at someone with brown eyes, brown we know is a dominant characteristic. It's a dominant allele. It's a dominant expression of genes, and that's going to mask a recessive allele, blue or green or hazel eyes or something like that. Now, in reality, there's more than one chromosome that goes into eye color, but, you know, for the sake of making things simple, the dominant allele produces the same phenotype in heterozygotes, where there are two different chromosomes because the dominant masks, and in homozygotes, where they're both coded for brown eyes. So this kind of goes with number 1, each trait is determined by a specific element, or you know, that's kind of talking about, you know, there are things, these alleles in your body that are talking about specific things. You know, there's one thing that says, or, you know, a group of things that say what color your skin is and what color your hair is and how tall you're going to be and how wide your bone structure is going to be and how long your nose is going to be. Those are determined by specific elements, and that's kind of where he's talking about those alleles and the chromosomes. Well, the alleles, the chromosome pairs, the section of the genes that code for certain things. Okay? Alleles on different chromosomes are distributed randomly to individual gametes. I guess these kind of goes with each characteristic is inherited separately. So, you know, just because you have brown eyes, what this is talking about up here, just because you have brown eyes, that doesn't mean you're going to have brown hair. Those are different characteristics, different sets of alleles. They are not, you know, connected. It's not like people are just, you know, it's not like there's a box that says brown or fair or something like that. You know, hair color does not denote eye color, does not denote skin color, does not denote height. You know, all those things are separate. Over here it says alleles on different chromosomes are distributed randomly to individuals. So in your body right now, each of your cells has 2 sets of chromosomes. For, you know, when the meiosis happens and we take one parent cell and then it splits into 4 daughter cells, we are taking those chromosomes, we're copying them once, and then we're not copying them. So we're going to end up with, you know, 1 chromosome in each of those gametes, but it's just random which one goes into which thing. So let's say that, you know, you are heterozygous for brown eyes. Well, 2 of your cells, since your original chromosomes were copied, 2 of your cells are going to have that dominant brown-eyed trait, and then 2 of your other cells are going to have that recessive trait for a different eye color. And which one is which is random, and which one becomes the egg or the sperm cell that ultimately gets fertilized or does the fertilization is also random. So that's kind of the basis of Mendel's laws, again going over what was in the video, each trait is determined by a specific element. That's going with this idea of alleles. There is a specific section of your DNA that determines your different characteristics. And those are what we call our alleles. Number two, each characteristic is inherited separately. Again, you know, your genetics for height have nothing to do with your genetics for which hand is going to be your dominant hand. Those are separate things, and you can, possibly get a dominant allele from your mother that's going to determine your height, and then you can get both of your parents will have recessive alleles, and everyone in your family will end up left-handed, and you can get a dominant allele from your father, and then that's going to give you brown hair. But all of those things are completely separated. And then each characteristic is determined by intersections. So you're going to get, one allele from each parent, and then the dominant one, if the dominant one is there, is going to be the one that is shown. If you have two that are the same, they're called homozygous, and if you have two that are different, they're heterozygous. Now, in all cases, in heterozygous cases, the dominant one is going to be shown. In homozygous cases, clearly, if you have two that are dominant, you'll see the dominant allele, and if you have two that are recessive, you'll see the recessive allele. So that's kind of the basis of Mendel's laws.